The night was quiet, too quiet for Boston in the spring of 1775. Lanterns burned low behind shuttered windows, and the cobbled streets echoed with the distant creak of wagon wheels. Somewhere beyond the harbor, a faint fog rolled over the ships like a shroud. The smell of gunpowder still lingered from the skirmishes of Lexington and Concord, whispers of a rebellion that refused to die. A boy no older than 16 crouched beneath the Old North Church. His name was Thomas Hale, the printer's apprentice, though few knew his second life. The world thought him a messenger boy. In truth, he carried secrets worth more than gold, letters coded in invisible ink, meant for the men who called themselves patriots. He trembled as he waited for the bell tower's signal. 1 lantern if the British marched by land, 2 if by sea. But tonight was different. Tonight there were 3. From the darkness behind him, a voice whispered, "They've changed the code, lad. The redcoats are moving faster than we thought." Thomas turned. It was Samuel Prescott, the rider who'd escaped capture after Paul Revere's arrest. His coat was torn, his horse lathered with sweat. "We ride for Concord again," he said, pressing a folded parchment into the boy's palm. "Deliver this to Dr. Warren and tell him the British know about the powder stores." The boy nodded, clutching the message like his own heartbeat. Before dawn, he would run through alleys and fields, chased by patrols, guided by the echo of liberty that no musket could silence. That night, the American Revolution truly began, not with declarations or speeches, but with a frightened boy running through fog, carrying words that could free a nation. The world caught fire in April. The British believed they could crush rebellion with a march. General Thomas Gage, Commander-in-Chief of His Majesty's forces in North America, had ordered 700 redcoats to seize weapons stored by colonial militias in Concord. To the British Crown, it was a simple act of discipline. To the colonists, it was an invasion. They called it the shot heard round the world. The battle at Lexington Green left 8 Americans dead, farmers mostly, standing against the finest army in the world. But by the time the British retreated to Boston, the countryside had risen like a storm. Bells rang in every village. Militiamen swarmed from fields and forests. The colonies were no longer colonies. They were an army. In the taverns of Boston, men whispered of independence. In the pews of New England churches, ministers thundered that God himself stood with liberty. And in a dimly lit room above a Boston print shop, Thomas Hale listened as his master, Nathaniel Adams, set the type for the most dangerous pamphlet ever printed. When government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Thomas read the words with trembling fingers. They were from a draft, a secret document circulated by a man named Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. Few had seen it, fewer still dared to print it. But in Boston, whispers traveled faster than ships. "Do you believe it?" Thomas asked. Adams looked up, his eyes shadowed by candlelight. "Believe it? I'd die for it, but I'd rather print it first." Outside, soldiers patrolled. Inside, the presses turned like thunder. Every sheet of paper carried rebellion inked into its veins. By the summer of 1775, Boston was a city under siege. The British Army occupied the center. The colonial militias surrounded it from the hills. Families starved, rumors spread, and spies thrived in the cracks between loyalty and survival. Among them was Eliza Strong, a widowed tavern owner whose sharp tongue hid a sharper mind. Her tavern, the King's Mercy, was where redcoats drank ale, officers whispered orders, and rebels slipped messages under mugs. She was everyone's friend and no one's ally. One evening, a man in plain clothes entered her tavern, his boots still dusted with road mud. He sat by the hearth, ordered no drink, and watched the soldiers like a hawk. Eliza approached. "You look lost, traveler." He smiled faintly. "I'm looking for a name." "What name?" "Liberty." She paused, her heart skipping. The password. He was one of Washington's new men. The stranger leaned close. "I need a rider to deliver something across the lines. There's a farm near Cambridge. Ask for Mr. Brewster. He's expecting you." Eliza nodded, wiping her hands on her apron to hide the tremor. In that instant, she knew her tavern would become more than a business. It would become a gateway for secrets. That night, she found Thomas Hale hiding in her cellar, soaked and breathless. "You again?" she said, half smiling. "Boston's fastest ghost?" "They're watching the print shop," he whispered. "Adams was arrested. I barely escaped." "Then you'll serve me now," she said. "We serve ale upstairs and freedom below." And so it began the Liberty Web, a network of messengers, printers, and spies that would one day merge into the legendary Culper Ring, the silent army that outsmarted the British Empire with ink, code, and courage. June 1775. The hills around Boston smoldered like kindling. The British Army, trapped inside the city, looked out upon a sea of angry colonists. From Dorchester Heights to Charlestown, campfires glowed across the darkness like 1,000 rebel stars. At dawn, a strange silence fell. Then came thunder. The Battle of Bunker Hill had begun. Cannonballs screamed across the harbor. The smoke rose so thick that the sun turned red. On the slopes above Charlestown, farmers and blacksmiths, men who had never fought in battle, stood shoulder to shoulder behind crude fortifications. The redcoats advanced in perfect lines, their bayonets gleaming. The Americans waited until they could see the whites of their eyes, and then they fired. The first volley tore through the British ranks. The second drove them back down the hill. The third came only after the colonists' powder ran dry. When it ended, more than 1,000 British soldiers lay dead or wounded. The colonists had lost the hill, but gained something greater. They had proved they could stand against the Empire. Far from the battlefield, in a drafty farmhouse in Cambridge, a tall Virginian with piercing blue eyes watched the smoke on the horizon. George Washington, newly appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, said nothing for a long time. Then, in a deep voice that silenced the room, he said, "These men may lack discipline, but not spirit. With time, we shall have both." He turned to his aides, men like Nathaniel Greene, Henry Knox, and Joseph Reed, and gave his first secret order. "We shall need more than muskets to win this war. We shall need eyes and ears in Boston, in New York, even in London. If this be treason, let it be well informed." And thus, before the ink of independence had ever dried, the first American intelligence service was born. Thomas Hale was 17 when he became a spy. After Nathaniel Adams' arrest, the print shop lay abandoned, its windows shattered by redcoat muskets. But in the basement, hidden behind false walls, Thomas had preserved what truly mattered: the press, the paper, and the plates. Each night he returned through alleys and shadows to print leaflets, signed only with a single symbol: the Liberty Eagle. His word spread faster than any messenger. Freedom is not granted by kings, it is taken by the brave. British officers hunted for the author. They called him the printer's ghost. But only 3 people knew his name: Eliza Strong, Dr. Joseph Warren, and a mysterious man who signed his letters C. C never appeared in person. His messages arrived by dead drop, hidden beneath church pews or inside hollow candlesticks. The instructions were always clear, always dangerous. Intercept troop manifests, map their artillery, find the traitor in Cambridge. Thomas began to suspect C was not an ordinary patriot. His commands bore the mark of military precision, as if written by someone close to Washington himself. One evening, Eliza entered the print cellar with a sealed envelope. "Another letter from C," she said. Thomas slit it open, eyes narrowing at the new order. A British officer, codename Mercury, seeks passage to New York with intelligence. Intercept him before the harbor. His betrayal may turn the tide. He looked up at Eliza. "Mercury's a spy?" "No," she said grimly. "He's worse, a double agent." That night, Thomas would ride out toward the coast under a moonless sky, unaware that his mission would cross paths with the British Secret Service, and that his first act of espionage would make him both a hero and a hunted man. Boston Harbor, December 1775. The winter wind cut through canvas sails and rattled the frozen rigging. British ships loomed like black mountains against the horizon. On the docks, soldiers loaded crates marked with the royal seal, unaware that among them walked a boy carrying a false permit and a stolen uniform. Thomas moved with practiced calm. The letter from C was tucked in his boot. Beneath his coat, he carried a vial of invisible ink and a pistol with one shot. He found the ship, HMS Mercury. Its captain, a tall man with silver hair, spoke with quiet authority. Name: Private Andrews, sir. Special dispatch from General Howe. The captain studied him for a moment. "You're young for a dispatch rider." Thomas smiled faintly. "War makes men young, sir." Permission granted, he stepped aboard. Below deck, the hold reeked of tar and rum. He searched through crates until he found one labeled Personal Correspondence. Inside, hidden behind false papers, lay a small locked chest. The key hung around the captain's neck. Thomas waited until nightfall, when the crew drank and sang on deck. He slipped into the captain's quarters and found the man asleep by candlelight, letters scattered across the desk. One bore the mark of the British Secret Committee, addressed to London. "Colonel Benjamin Church remains in our service. His reports from the rebel camp are invaluable." Thomas froze. Church? Dr. Joseph Warren's confidant, member of the Provincial Congress, was a traitor. The British had a spy inside Washington's ranks. He took the letter, replaced the seal with wax, and fled into the cold night. But before he reached the shore, muskets roared. A bullet grazed his shoulder. The captain's voice thundered behind him. "Stop that boy! He's the ghost!" Thomas dove into the freezing harbor, clutching the soaked letter to his chest. Hours later, fishermen found him half dead on the beach near Dorchester. When he awoke, Washington himself stood beside his bed. The general's gaze was calm but sharp. "You risked your life for this?" Thomas nodded weakly. "Sir, we have a traitor." Washington read the letter in silence, then folded it with care. "Then you have done this nation a service beyond measure." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "From this day you shall serve under a different command, not of muskets, but of shadows." And so the first seeds of the Culper spy network were sown in the blood of a boy who dared to print the truth. Cambridge, winter 1775. Snow fell like ash upon the army encampment. Ragged men huddled around fires that burned more smoke than warmth. They called themselves soldiers now, though few had uniforms and fewer still had shoes. Yet hope, thin, defiant hope, burned among them like the last candle before dawn. In the headquarters at Harvard Yard, General Washington stood before the fire, the letter Thomas had stolen lying open on the table. Across from him sat Dr. Joseph Warren, physician, patriot, and one of the men Washington trusted most. "It cannot be true," Warren whispered, staring at the letter. "Benjamin Church has been with us since the start. He drafted our appeals to Parliament, carried messages to Adams, even—" He stopped, unable to finish. Washington's gaze was steady. "The letter bears his cipher, confirmed by our own. The British did not forge this." Silence filled the room. Thomas Hale stood in the corner, pale but silent. Eliza Strong beside him, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Warren turned to Thomas. "You're certain of what you saw?" "Yes, sir," the boy said. "The letter was aboard the HMS Mercury, ready to sail for London." Warren bowed his head. Then God forgive him. By evening, Dr. Benjamin Church was arrested and brought before the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. Confronted with the evidence, he confessed, claiming he had only sought to temper the fury of both sides. Few believed him. He was condemned, imprisoned, and would die years later in obscurity, the first American spy caught betraying his own revolution. Washington said little of it afterward. But from that day he carried a quiet resolve in his eyes, a belief that words could be as deadly as bullets, and secrecy as sacred as prayer. "If we are to win this war," he told his aides, "we must master the art of shadows as well as of swords." Spring 1776. The siege of Boston had dragged for nearly a year. Disease spread faster than bullets, and rations were low. But Washington's army, against every odd, still held its lines. Then, in March, a miracle. General Henry Knox, barely 25, had dragged 60 tons of captured artillery from Fort Ticonderoga across frozen mountains and rivers. When the cannons were mounted on Dorchester Heights, overlooking the British fleet, the redcoats awoke to find death staring down their throats. General Howe had no choice. The British evacuated Boston. For the first time, the city was free. Church bells rang, flags rose. Washington rode through cheering streets as the people hailed him as a savior. But even amid the joy, he knew the war was far from over. The next British target would be New York, and New York would not fall so easily. That night, in his study, he met with a small group in secret, men and women he would never name in public. Among them, Eliza Strong, under the alias Anna Carter, Thomas Hale, now 19 and officially a courier, and a shadowed officer whose name was recorded only as Agent C. Washington spoke softly. "We have seen what betrayal can do. We cannot afford another church. From this night forward, you will form a circle of trust, no larger than necessary, no smaller than survival. You will gather intelligence from within the enemy's ranks, intercept their codes, and report only through encrypted correspondence. Your names shall be known to Providence and to me." Thomas exchanged a glance with Eliza. "What shall we call this circle, sir?" he asked. Washington allowed himself the faintest smile. "Call it what it is, a ring of truth." And thus began the earliest foundation of what would later be known as the Culper Spy Ring, the silent backbone of American independence. Summer 1776. New York smelled of salt, tar, and tension. British ships, hundreds of them, lined the harbor like floating fortresses. From Staten Island to Long Island, redcoats landed in waves, 30,000 strong. Against them stood Washington's ragged army, barely 10,000 men, hungry, tired, and outgunned. Eliza and Thomas arrived under forged papers, posing as merchants from Philadelphia. Their cover, a small bookshop near Hanover Square that sold imported literature and carried in its cellar a hidden printing press. Eliza hung a wooden sign above the door, "Carter and Sons, Books, Letters, and Paper." By day, they sold novels in pamphlets. By night, they copied intercepted dispatches and smuggled coded letters disguised as advertisements. Their ink was lemon juice, their ciphers biblical verses, their couriers ordinary fishermen and washerwomen who vanished into the streets. They watched as New York trembled. On July 9th, the Declaration of Independence was read aloud to the Continental Army. Cheers rose. Soldiers tore down the statue of King George III and melted it into bullets. But on September 27th came Brooklyn Heights, the first great disaster. The British struck hard and fast, flanking the Americans through fog and marsh. Thousands were captured or killed. Washington himself barely escaped across the East River under cover of night. From the roof of their shop, Thomas and Eliza watched the glow of burning camps across the water. Eliza's voice was quiet. "If we lose New York," Thomas finished the thought, "we lose the heart of the revolution." The next morning, the British flag flew over Manhattan. Yet even in defeat, Washington's secret ring remained. Their mission changed to spy, survive, and sabotage from within the occupied city. Autumn 1776. New York became a city divided, part battlefield, part cage. British soldiers patrolled the streets, loyalists filled the taverns, and under it all, a network of whispers grew. Eliza Strong's tavern front was gone, but she built something deadlier in its place, a code exchange hidden in plain sight. Books ordered with strange titles, The Silent Harvest, The Shadowed Lamb, were signals. Each customer was a courier. Thomas worked nights printing false passes and intercepted orders. One message, smuggled through their network, warned that the British planned to trap Washington's army on the mainland. Without it, the revolution might have ended that week. But the danger was constant. One night, a man arrived at the shop before curfew, a tall figure with a scar down his cheek and a red officer's coat hidden beneath a cloak. He placed a coin on the counter. "Do you have the shadowed lamb?" Eliza stiffened, the code phrase. "Yes," she said carefully, "but it's out of print." The man smiled thinly. "Then perhaps this will do instead." He pulled a dagger from his coat. Thomas lunged forward, striking his arm. The weapon clattered to the floor. British soldiers burst through the door behind him, too many to fight. Eliza grabbed the nearest lamp and hurled it. The room erupted in fire. Smoke and chaos filled the air. They escaped through the cellar tunnel as flames consumed the press. Outside, the city burned with them. The Great Fire of New York, September 1776. Half the city turned to ash. The British blamed the Patriots. But Washington's ring survived, scattered in the ruins. As they fled north through the charred streets, Thomas looked back at the glowing skyline. All that work gone.
Eliza shook her head. "Ink can burn," she said, "but truth doesn't." They disappeared into the smoke, the last ghosts of liberty in a conquered city.
December 17th, 1776. The Revolution was dying. After the fall of New York, Washington's army retreated across New Jersey, beaten, broken, and bleeding. His men marched barefoot through snow that turned red beneath their feet. Supplies were gone, spirits were worse. Desertions grew each day. Eliza Strong and Thomas Hale traveled in disguise with the army, officially as a nurse and a courier. But beneath the surface, their work continued, intercepting loyalist messages, planting false information, and carrying coded letters from Washington's tent to hidden allies in Philadelphia. In one such letter, Washington wrote, "We are in desperate straits. If Providence favors us not soon, this cause will perish from the earth." The British believed victory was certain. General Cornwallis had sent word to London, "The rebel general is all but finished. His army shall melt away with the frost." But they underestimated one thing: the quiet network that moved unseen between camps and towns, gathering whispers and secrets. From Eliza's reports and Thomas's stolen correspondence, Washington learned that the British planned to halt their pursuit and rest for winter, spreading their forces thin across the Delaware River. A chance had come, a small one, but enough for a desperate man. On the night of December 22nd, 1776, inside a cold farmhouse lit by a single candle, Washington summoned his closest officers. Among them stood two civilians, Eliza and Thomas, under their false names. The general's voice was low but resolute. "Gentlemen, our situation is dire, but the enemy believes we are finished, and that belief is our greatest weapon." He unrolled a crude map on the table. "The Hessian garrison at Trenton is unguarded. We will cross the Delaware and strike them by surprise before dawn on Christmas Day." A murmur swept the room. The river was half frozen, the weather deadly. Colonel Knox spoke first. "Sir, many will die in the crossing." Washington's jaw tightened. "Many will die if we do nothing." Then he turned to Eliza. "Your reports confirm the Hessians are drunk with holiday feasting?" "Yes, General," she said. "Our contact inside Trenton, a German-born tavern maid named Greta, swears their commander, Colonel Rahl, dismisses all warnings of attack." Washington nodded. "Then we must thank Miss Greta and pray her words are true." To Thomas he said only this: "You have risked much already. I ask once more, will you ride with us?" The boy smiled faintly. "Sir, I never learned to stop." Outside, the storm began to howl. Christmas night, 1776. Snow lashed the river like knives. Washington's army, 2,400 men, gathered silently along the frozen banks of the Delaware. Ice floes crashed in the black water, the wind carrying the smell of powder and fear. Then came the order: "Push off!" Oars splintered against ice. Men heaved and shouted. Horses screamed as they slipped on frozen decks. In the distance, thunder rumbled, not from the heavens, but from the weight of destiny itself. Halfway across, a gust tore Thomas's cap from his head. He looked up and saw Washington standing upright in the lead boat, his cloak whipping in the wind, his expression carved from iron. For a moment, it felt as if the entire revolution, every dream, every fear, rested on that single man's shoulders. They reached the far bank just before dawn. Exhausted, soaked, freezing, but alive. Morning broke gray and bitter. The snow had turned to sleet, blinding and sharp. Yet through they marched Washington's men, muskets ready, teeth clenched. Eliza stayed with the supply wagons, tending the wounded as they advanced. Thomas moved ahead as a scout, using local guides and their coded paths to slip around the Hessian sentries. He reached the edge of Trenton just as the first volley erupted. Boom! Cannon fire echoed down the streets. The Hessians, drunk and disoriented, stumbled from their barracks into chaos. Continental soldiers surged forward from every side. Washington rode at the front, his voice carrying over the storm. "Advance for liberty!" Within an hour, it was over. The enemy commander, Colonel Rahl, lay dying in the snow, whispering for mercy. Over 900 Hessians surrendered. Not a single American soldier was lost in the assault. It was a miracle. When the smoke cleared, Thomas stood amid the frozen corpses and broken flags. For the first time in months, he felt warmth, not from the fires, but from something deeper, hope. Eliza found him beside a captured cannon. "We did it," she whispered. He nodded. "No," he said softly. "He did it, Washington, and the faith that never froze." That night the campfires burned bright again. Men sang hymns and drank weak ale, their laughter echoing across the river. Word spread like wildfire. The impossible had happened. The revolution lived. Washington wrote one line in his journal that night. "Victory is the child of perseverance and secrecy."